Iron Man develops severe anxiety. Ever since the alien invasion in New York, Tony has seen firsthand how terrifying a war between godlike civilizations can be, and just how insignificant humans are in the face of these so-called gods. Even though he can go toe-to-toe with gods like Thor, it's only because of his Iron Man suit that he stands a fighting chance. Without it, he's nothing more than a regular guy with a bit of money, so Tony throws himself into a frenzy of building new Iron Man suits. Right now, he's testing his latest creation, the Mark 42, nicknamed Prodigal Son. Using microchips implanted in his body, Tony is able to remotely control the Mark 42, assembling it piece by piece on command. However, this technology is unstable, and every time Tony wears the Prodigal Son, it's accompanied by unpredictable mishaps.
I'm the best.
Tony's mental and physical state has rapidly deteriorated, something that hasn't escaped the notice of his close friend, Rhodey. After going 3 days and nights without sleep, Tony becomes hypersensitive, to the point where even a child's whisper can send him into a state of high alert. It feels like the entire world is filled with danger, and only by donning the Iron Man armor can he find a moment of peace and security. But Tony can't stay in his suit 24 hours a day. Can he? When all is quiet, the horrors of the New York battles still invade Tony's dreams. Unconsciously, he triggers the Prodigal Son's summoning mechanism. Prodigal Son perceives Pepper as a threat and nearly kills her. Afterward, despite Tony's explanation, Pepper insists on sleeping in a separate room. Meanwhile, a man named Killian quietly enters Pepper's life. He's working on a mysterious project called Extremis and suggests Stark Industries might be interested in it. As Pepper and Killian were discussing business, Happy discreetly contacted Tony, having looked into Killian's background and feeling like he had seen Killian somewhere before. All of this traces back to a night 13 years ago. Back then, Tony was a full-blown playboy, enjoying a romantic evening with his former girlfriend, Maya. Killian, being a diehard fan of Tony's, appeared as well, eager to introduce his new research and hoping to get Tony to invest in it. Wanting to get rid of Killian quickly, Tony casually promised to meet him on the rooftop in 5 minutes, but he quickly became engrossed in his sweet conversation with Maya. Maya's research was a groundbreaking project in brain science. If successful, it would allow control over the human genetic system, prevent many diseases, and even regenerate dead tissue. Maya passionately named this project the Extremis virus, but Tony was completely captivated by Maya and forgot all about his promise to meet Killian, leaving him waiting alone in the cold for an entire night. From that moment on, a seed of hatred was planted in Killian's heart. Happy knew that Killian's sudden appearance was no coincidence. He feared this was part of an elaborate revenge plot, with Killian trying to get close to Pepper as a means to reach Tony. After learning more about the Extremis project, Pepper concluded that it was far too dangerous, and she politely declined Killian's offer to collaborate. As Killian left, disappointed, Happy secretly jotted down their license plate number, determined to dig deeper. Sure enough, while tailing them, Happy uncovered a secret transaction. Killian's henchman, Savon, sold a canister of some mysterious substance to a homeless man. After Savon left, Happy approached the man and, pretending to accidentally bump into him, seized the opportunity to steal the contents of the container. But just as Happy was about to slip away, he was intercepted by Savon. Savon displayed a shocking ability to heal. A red glow emanated from his head, and his wounds quickly mended. Savon successfully defended himself against Happy's attacks and ultimately slammed him to the ground with great force. Just as Savon was about to pursue further, the homeless man, after inhaling the substance from the canister, underwent a violent transformation and exploded on the spot. The massive blast wave severely injured everyone nearby. However, to Happy's shock, despite being gravely injured, Savon rapidly recovered and calmly left the scene. Happy's condition quickly caught Tony's attention. He realized that this incident bore a striking resemblance to the recent series of terrorist bombings. The common thread: there was never any bomb residue left at the scene. Tony suspected that the attack on Happy was also orchestrated by the Mandarin organization. The Mandarin publicly admitted on television that he was the mastermind behind the recent string of terrorist attacks. When the media pressed Tony on whether he would take action against the Mandarin, Tony made a daring decision. He publicly revealed his home address and declared war on his enemy. Back in his lab, Tony gathered all the data from the recent explosions for analysis, finding that 2 of them closely matched what happened to Happy. Just as Tony began to make some headway, an even greater crisis loomed. Because of Tony's public challenge, the media swarmed his house, with helicopters hovering overhead for live coverage. At that moment, Tony's ex-girlfriend, Maya, suddenly appeared, claiming she had something important to tell him. Although Pepper had grown used to this sort of thing, she remained cautiously alert. Sensing the tension in the air, just as they were about to talk, a missile streaked through the sky without warning, heading straight for them. In an instant, the explosion's shockwave hurled them through the air, completely caught off guard. In this life-or-death moment, Tony didn't hesitate to activate the Mark 42 suit, placing it on Pepper to protect her and help both her and Maya escape.
Get her, I'm gonna find a way around.
As the enemy's relentless bombardment continued, the entire building began to teeter on the brink of collapse, leaving Tony in an unprecedentedly desperate situation. Thankfully, Jarvis informed Tony that Pepper had safely evacuated, so Tony quickly recalled the prodigal son armor.
Jarvis, where's my flight power?
Working on it, sir. This is a prototype.
But the suit was still in the testing phase. Its energy levels weren't enough to support Tony's flight, and it lacked the weapon systems. With no missiles loaded, while dodging the enemy's attacks, Tony swiftly adjusted the suit's position, using the repulsor from his palm to hurl a piano, which successfully destroyed an enemy aircraft. However, this maneuver also revealed his position, making him the target of a fresh wave of attacks. Amidst the hail of bullets and rockets, Tony weaved through the onslaught, pulling out a micromissile from his arm, preparing for a lethal counterattack. Switching to manual mode, Tony made a precise throw, successfully taking out another fighter jet. Unfortunately, the downed aircraft came crashing towards him. The remaining jet, seeing this, intensified its assault, determined to end Tony's life. Faced with such a ferocious barrage, Tony could only watch helplessly as his mansion was obliterated, and he himself was plunged into the cold ocean waters along with the collapsing structure. Even worse, his armor was tightly entangled by steel cables, dragging him down into the depths of the ocean. The attacking forces, assuming Tony was dead since he hadn't resurfaced for a long time, quickly withdrew from the scene. After Pepper reached the shoreline, she frantically searched for any sign of Tony, but found nothing. Filled with anxiety, she was helpless and desperate. Meanwhile, beneath the ocean, Tony lay buried under the wreckage, his fate uncertain. Fortunately, Jarvis remained operational, controlling the mechanical arm. It forcibly pulled Tony out from the depths of the debris. It then tapped into the last remaining power reserves, propelling Tony to break through the water's surface with remarkable speed. This scene is undoubtedly one of the most disastrous escapes in Iron Man's career. When Tony regained consciousness, the prodigal son armor had run out of energy, crashing heavily to the ground with a chilling thud. Tony removed his helmet and asked Jarvis where they were. Jarvis replied that they were in northern Tennessee, the location of one of the recent terrorist explosions. After Tony separated from the armor, the prodigal son suffered unprecedented damage, and Jarvis, due to low energy, went into hibernation. Faced with this sudden turn of events, Tony gritted his teeth and, with great effort, carried the damaged suit as he staggered onward. On his journey, Tony first found a convenience store, where he quickly contacted Pepper to let her know he was safe. Concerned for Pepper's safety, Tony decided not to return to Stark Tower just yet. He chose to drag the damaged armor by himself and press on. Before long, Tony discovered an abandoned warehouse, which would serve as his temporary shelter to repair the suit. As he busied himself with repairs, a young boy named Harley unexpectedly showed up, breaking the silence. It turns out that this is Harley's secret base.
Yes. And now you're out of ammo.
What's that thing on your chest?
It's a electromagnet. You should know. I've got a box of them right here.
What does it power?
Harley is a big fan of Iron Man. To Tony's surprise, Harley brought shocking news. The media was flooding with reports of Tony's death. Tony was unfazed by this. He traded a small gadget from his suit in exchange for the valuable parts Harley had that were needed to repair the armor. During their conversation, Tony learned that this small town had also been struck by a terrorist attack, prompting him to visit the explosion site in search of clues. Harley told him that a man named Davis had built a bomb and accidentally killed himself, along with 5 other people nearby. but something struck Tony as odd. Those 6 people, including Davis, had died. There were only 5 shadows on the wall. Tony then asked Harley about Davis's mother, hoping to learn more of the truth from her. Upon meeting Tony, Davis's mother handed him a file. At that moment, Tony realized that someone else had already arranged to meet with Davis's mother, and she had mistaken him for that person. Suddenly, a mysterious woman barged in, attempting to subdue Tony, just as a local sheriff off duty and drinking stepped in to intervene. Even though Brandt claimed she was with Homeland Security, the sheriff demanded she get approval from the governor before making any arrests. Brandt, on the other hand, attacked. Tony reacted quickly, trying to escape, only to find Savon lying in wait once again. With no other options, Tony ducked into a convenience store, but as he turned around, Brandt had already appeared in his line of sight, relentlessly pursuing him. Brandt's body could generate intense heat, hot enough to melt handcuffs, which left Tony deeply frustrated. He quickly sets off a barrel of Chua seed oil in an attempt to block Brandt's progress, but finds that Brandt doesn't care about it. However, Tony had already set a trap, placing a metal necklace inside a microwave to heat it up. With a loud bang, the gas exploded, blowing Brandt to ashes in an instant. Just when Tony thought the crisis was over, Savon used his abilities to melt the iron frame of a water tower, sending a massive flood of water that swept Tony out of the safe zone. Even worse, Savon had kidnapped Harley. In this critical moment, Harley cleverly used the toy Tony had given him to unexpectedly knock Savon down, seizing the opportunity to escape. Seeing this, Tony immediately fired his repulsor, blasting Savon away, and quickly fled with Harley. However, thanks to the power of Extremis, Savon rapidly healed, once again becoming a threat to Tony. Meanwhile, Maya revealed the truth to Pepper. Her boss was none other than Killian, who was deeply connected to the terrorist organization, the Mandarin. Meanwhile, the Mandarin became even more brazen, publicly executing a hostage during a live broadcast, which enraged President Ellis. He immediately ordered Rhodey to take the war machine into action. At this critical moment, Tony called Rhodey, asking for access to the military system to investigate Killian and the conspiracy behind him. Rhodey hesitated but ultimately gave Tony the password.
War Machine Rocks with an X, all caps.
That is so much better than Iron Patriot.
Yeah.
Tony quickly uncovered the details of the Extremis project. Those who successfully injected it gained extraordinary powers, and even lost limbs could regenerate. However, those who failed to merge with the virus would explode. This explained why so many terrorist bombings had occurred without any traces of explosives being found. It turned out that Killian had long been using this technology in collaboration with terrorist organizations, trying to achieve his sinister goals. Enraged that his plan had been exposed, Killian immediately kidnapped Pepper and injected her with Extremis. Meanwhile, Rhodey was searching for the Mandarin in the Middle East when he was ambushed by an Extremis-enhanced enemy and captured by the Mandarin. As for Tony, he followed clues from the Mandarin's broadcasts and finally tracked down the Mandarin's location, only to discover that his suit's power source was damaged and couldn't be recharged. This triggered Tony's anxiety once again. The thought of being powerless without his suit sent Tony into a panic.
You're a mechanic, right? You said so.
Right.
Why don't you just build something?
With Harley's encouragement, Tony pulled himself together. Though his suit wasn't fully repaired, he realized he could still create weapons by hand. People might think that without his Iron Man armor, Tony would be defenseless, but he proved them wrong. Using his intellect and bravery, Tony easily took down all the guards with his homemade weapons. However, when Tony finally confronted the Mandarin, he was shocked to discover an astonishing truth. The Mandarin was actually Killian. The man in front of him was just an actor and a puppet hired by Killian. Just when Tony was shocked, Savon appeared behind him silently and knocked him out with a blow. When Tony woke up, Killian was standing right in front of him. Killian was determined to get revenge for the time Tony had tricked him into waiting like a fool on the rooftop for hours. Now, he wanted Tony to taste the bitterness of despair. However, Maya, still holding onto some lingering affection for Tony, tried to use her own life as leverage, threatening Killian to let Tony go. Unfortunately, Maya had underestimated Killian's ruthless nature. Without hesitation, Killian shot and killed Maya. Afterward, Killian went to where Rhodey was being held, using extreme heat to force him out of the war machine armor.
breathe fire? This time tomorrow, I'll have the West's most powerful leader in one hand and the world's most feared terrorist in the other. I'll own the war on terror. Create supply and demand.
Killian then ordered Savon to put on the War Machine suit and proceed to the plane where President Ellis was, with the intent to kidnap him. Everyone assumed that Rhodey had been sent by the military to protect the president, but as soon as Savon boarded, he revealed his true identity, killing all of Ellis's bodyguards and leaving only Ellis alive before taking him hostage. Meanwhile, Tony's limited edition watch suddenly beeped. That was the signal that his suit had finished charging. It seemed Jarvis had completed the repairs on the Mark 42 armor. Since Tony had microchips implanted in his body, all the armor pieces could automatically track his location. The first to arrive was one of the suit's arms, which quickly made its way to the battlefield. With just the arm piece, Tony easily knocked 2 enemies to the ground. As for the rest of the armor, the parts were still soaring through the sky. Tony had no choice but to engage in combat using only a portion of the suit. Thanks to the suit's incredible mobility, the enemy's attacks proved useless, and Tony swiftly neutralized all threats. At that moment, the remaining suits of armor began to arrive one after another. Once Tony was fully suited up and ready for action, he received shocking news from Rhodey. The War Machine suit had been stolen. The two quickly teamed up and tracked down the fake Mandarin, Trevor. From Trevor's scattered bits of information, they pieced together that Killian's plan was to kidnap the president. They immediately decided to act. Rhodey contacted Vice President Rodriguez for assistance, but to their dismay, Rodriguez was working for Killian. He pretended to agree to rescue President Ellis, but in reality, did nothing. Tony knew he had to handle this on his own. By the time Tony arrived, Ellis had already been taken by Savon, who used the War Machine armor to abduct him. Savon, however, stayed behind on the plane. This time, Tony wasn't going to let Savon get away so easily.
President!
He's not here. Speaking of which, go fish.
But Savon had already planted bombs on the plane and triggered the explosion. In an instant, the passengers were thrown from the plane, falling through the sky. Without hesitation, Tony activated the arc reactor in his chest, unleashing a powerful energy wave that ripped Savon's body apart. This time Savon had no chance to recover. Tony then soared into the sky, instructing the falling passengers to grab onto each other, forming a human chain. In the end, he successfully saved everyone.
It's Chunky Monkey, let's go. Hello.
The rescued passengers erupted in cheers, thanking Tony for his heroic efforts. But Tony knew his mission wasn't over yet. There was still a greater challenge ahead. However, just as he turned around, Tony wasn't injured at all. It turned out that Tony had accomplished all of this by remotely controlling the Prodigal Son armor. Meanwhile, President Ellis was delivered to Killian's location. In the room where Ellis was imprisoned, Tony's beloved Pepper was also being held. Killian had Ellis and the War Machine suit suspended, planning to broadcast Ellis's execution live to the world. At this moment, Tony and Rhodey had secretly infiltrated the ship, strategizing their rescue mission, but Tony had a contingency plan all along. Though Killian had destroyed his mansion, the underground lab had remained intact. Tony remotely summoned all of his Iron Man suits to assist in the battle. From Mark 8 to Mark 42, a total of 35 Iron Man suits arrived. This was the most spectacular assembly of Iron Man suits in the history of Marvel films. Tony was putting everything on the line, not just to prevent the execution of Ellis, but to rescue the woman he loved, Pepper. Without hesitation, Tony gave the command to attack. Mark 37, Hammerhead, was the first to lock onto a target. Mark 31, Piston, shot forward like an arrow released from its bow, charging into the fray. Mark 41, Bones, the first modular suit, was a direct precursor to the design of the Mark 42, Prodigal Son. However, the enemies, having injected extremists, possessed extraordinary strength, making the battle incredibly difficult. Hammerhead was quickly destroyed, its crash causing a massive explosion that shook the battlefield. In a critical moment, Mark 38, Igor, stepped up, using its unmatched strength to lift heavy objects, buying precious time for the other suits. Under Jarvis's precise coordination, the suits worked seamlessly together, repelling the enemy forces. Mark 35, Red Snapper, fought valiantly under heavy assault from the extremis enhanced foes. Seeing this, Tony immediately dispatched Mark 17, Heartbreaker, to provide backup. Despite Heartbreaker's fierce combat, Red Snapper ultimately sacrificed itself, taking out the enemy in a final, self-destructive move. At this point, Tony had donned the Mark 33 Silver Centurion suit. Its sleek and luxurious design left Rhodey feeling envious, but just as Heartbreaker landed, two enemies pounced on it like ravenous wolves. Fortunately, Mark 25 Striker arrived in the nick of time, using its unique drill-like weapons to easily knock the enemies away. Tony finally located Pepper's position. Just as he was about to rescue her, a fiery red hand suddenly shot out, damaging the energy core of his suit. It was Killian. As Killian emerged from the ground, preparing to deliver a fatal blow to Tony, the Silver Centurion armor quickly deployed its blade, severing Killian's arm. However, the extreme heat from Killian's severed limb melted the nearby iron beams, putting Pepper in even greater danger. Mark 39 Star Boost quickly arrived to assist, but was intercepted by other extremis-enhanced enemies. Tony was forced to abandon the damaged armor. He sprinted toward Mark 22 Hot Rod, intending to suit up, but the armor was immediately knocked away. Luckily, Tony wasn't injured. Meanwhile, Rhodey's rescue mission to save Ellis had reached a fever pitch, but regular bullets were useless against the extremis-enhanced attackers. Two of the enemies charged forward, determined to knock Rhodey off the shipping container, but with remarkable courage and quick thinking, Rhodey successfully shot through the chains, sending the unsuspecting enemies tumbling into the fiery inferno below. At the last second, Rhodey successfully rescued Ellis, pulling him from the flames and reclaiming the War Machine suit. Rhodey decided to take Ellis to safety first, reducing the pressure on Tony. Tony, however, was in a dire situation. He reached out, trying to grab Pepper, but she lost her strength and fell into the fire below. There was no time for Tony to mourn. As Killian was closing in once again, Tony quickly suited up in Mark 16 Nightclub and engaged in the final battle with Killian. And despite Tony being in his armor, he couldn't withstand Killian's attacks and was knocked to the ground. Killian attacked him, but Tony was able to escape from his armor with his superior reflexes. As Tony was falling, the Mark 40 shotgun suit arrived just in time. Leaping onto a platform, Tony continued the fierce battle against Killian. Just as Killian was about to push Tony down again, Shotgun's back thrusters kicked in, stabilizing Tony. But Killian's next attack was even more vicious. With a swift strike, he sliced off Shotgun's arm, then slammed Tony hard onto the ground. At this moment, Tony was clearly at a disadvantage. Just as Killian was about to deliver the fatal blow, Tony once again managed to escape, leaving the suit behind to be sliced in half by Killian in an instant. At the moment when everyone thought Tony was out of options, the most powerful armor, Mark 42 Prodigal Son, finally returned. It descended onto the battlefield like a savior, giving Tony the chance to turn the tide. Tony immediately adopted a fierce combat stance. The legendary reputation of the anti-Tony suit was well-deserved. Tony quickly adjusted his strategy, skillfully maneuvering the Prodigal Son armor to bind itself tightly around Killian. This unexpected turn of events left Killian stunned, his body instantly rendered immobile. Without hesitation, Tony triggered the armor's self-destruct mechanism. Unleashing a deafening explosion, Tony swiftly jumped into the Mark 15 armor, successfully escaping the scene. As Tony stared at the scattered pieces of Iron Man armor, thinking victory was at hand, an unbelievable sight unfolded before him. Amidst the roaring flames, Killian's figure rose once again. Killian's strength far exceeded Tony's expectations, and Tony had lost all hope of defeating him. But just at that critical moment, a familiar figure appeared like a divine force descending from the heavens. It was Pepper. She hadn't died after all. She had successfully adapted to extremis and gained extraordinary powers. The Mark 9 armor roared as it charged toward Pepper, identifying her as a threat. But Pepper had already gained extraordinary strength. She effortlessly dodged the suit's attack, then leaped into the air and, with a single punch, shattered its tough exterior. This scene shocked Tony. He witnessed Pepper's transformation and strength. Pepper kicked a missile toward Killian and used a precise repulsor blast to detonate it. In the fiery explosion that followed, Killian was finally destroyed, reduced to ashes. Seeing Pepper safe and sound, Tony felt an overwhelming sense of relief and joy. He held her tightly in his arms, feeling the hard-earned peace and happiness. Tony then made a decision to detonate all of his remaining Iron Man suits. It was not only a farewell to Tony's past life but also his most sincere Christmas gift to Pepper. In the final moments of the film, both Vice President Rodriguez and Trevor were arrested. Happy awoke from his coma, Harley received a complete upgrade to his laboratory, courtesy of Tony. Tony also successfully stabilized the extremis inside Pepper, helping her return to a normal life. And at last, Tony made a choice for himself. He had the shrapnel that had long been embedded in his chest removed. This meant that Tony no longer had to be constantly ready to transform into a superhero to face crises. He could finally enjoy the happiness and peace of an ordinary life. And we will never again see a standalone Iron Man movie starring Robert Downey Jr. Follow me for more exciting updates. See you next time.